And so we come to the last of the original Wallace and Gromit trilogy, which arguably is the best, yet ironically the least remembered, which is all the more ironic given the icon that was created through this special. This is the first of the Wallace and Gromit lineage to introduce another defining feature of theirs, that being that they seem to switch jobs between every episode, which is a great way of introducing more set pieces and situations for the pair to come across. In this special, Wallace and Gromit are window cleaners, and when doing a job one day, Wallace comes across the woman of his dreams, a yarn saleswoman called Gwendolyn, voiced by Anne Reid, and while the two seem to hit it off well, Gromit notices that her dog, Preston, seems to be up to no good, and while pursuing him, he ends up being framed and thrown in jail, which requires Wallace to help break him out with some rather unusual help. This is the first short to have a character that Wallace can talk to and have them talk back to him, and she's a very good vocal supporting character.
Well,
What was it you wanted? Oh, the spanking. You've done a grand job.
windows are our speciality.
Goodbye. Chuck.
Many people say that she's just a female Wallace, but I think that's a bit unfair. She's a lot more reserved and shy than Wallace, and it's quite sweet. And she and Wallace have good chemistry, and Anne Reid does a great job with her very sweet and gentle delivery. Despite that though, this is also the darkest and most emotional of the Wallace and Gromit franchise, not the least of which due to the slightly overwrought but still very well done music. But regardless of that, the story has some incredibly emotional moments that make you totally feel for these characters and see them in ways that you hadn't seen them before, and it really ups the emotional moments from the previous short. As for the darker parts, well, I have to say that any animated short meant for kid that involves sheep rustling, jailbreaks, mincing and other dark elements that I won't reveal here, since there are some cracking plot twists at the end, is dark in my book. The intro sets the tone perfectly with some of the darkest music and most suspenseful moments I've ever seen in the series. Said plot twists are both amazing and terrifying in their own right, and that all comes down to the main villain, Preston, once again having the same amount of vocabulary as the previous villains, but this time is incredibly intimidating. With his literal bulldog look and imposing figure, this is a mutt that you'll be scared to pet, and once his secret is revealed at the end, you'll be hiding behind the sofa, as I did when I first saw this as a kid. But of course, the character that everyone remembers from this short is the one and only Shaun the Sheep, a feisty little lamb with attitude that ends up getting roped into this odd mystery, and became iconic for his do anything he felt like nature, similar to Deadpool, if he was British. And no, that doesn't count. Who proved to be so popular of a character he spawned hundreds of merchandise, his own spin-off show, then a spin-off of the spin-off called Timmy Time, and even his own movie, which we'll be getting into later on in the month. Which is impressive for a character who can only speak in Baz! But then again, that's a one-up from most of Aardman's mute characters since he can still say something. Speaking of which, it's amazing to consider that at this point in their career, half of the characters Aardman had created didn't say a word, and yet they still had a great amount of personality, which just goes to show how talented Park and Lord are with their craft to be able to make mute plasticine so alive and have so many expressions. Speaking of which, the animation has had a major upgrade from the previous short too, now with incorporating things like moving cars, planes, loads more moving objects on screen at once, and of course, the porridge gun.
At the boy, Gromit!
All of this leads into the most intense and dire Wallace and Gromit yet, and while sadly the climax isn't quite as memorable as the previous, it is still very enthralling and funny at the same time. It's also the longest and biggest in scale of all the short's climaxes, starting from around the halfway point, and it just keeps going and gaining momentum until the final showdown between Gromit, Shaun and Preston, which almost feels like a set piece from an old platforming video game, and it's awesome, if a bit intense for a kids movie, but hey, at least there's no guns this time. This short also upgraded the ambitious qualities of the last special, with incorporating more impressive camera movements, set pieces, and now introducing the now staple of Aardman animation, all the little details, such as the signs in the background and all the little gadgets Wallace has on in his house, which are always charming little Easter eggs to find. They experimented with this in the last short, but it was brought to its full realization in this one, and it's great to have something like this that encourages rewatch value. This was also the first Wallace and Gromit short to introduce another staple that would become synonymous with the company, that being a group of interchangeable creatures or characters that would make great comic relief. In this movie, that comes from the sheep, of course, who are incredibly funny by just being around in odd and awkward moments, and in future Aardman productions this would be mimicked by the rabbits in The Were-Rabbit, the slugs in Flushed Away, and the elves in After Christmas. Even though by virtue of story, character moments and scale this is probably the best of the Wallace and Gromit franchise, I'd still recommend watching The Wrong Trousers over this one, since the darker tone of this might be a bit ostracizing if you haven't seen the others first. But this is still a great short, and it takes the two to the next level in terms of characters and as a franchise, but Aardman's efforts caught the sight of another up-and-coming animation company, and thus Wallace and Gromit was shelved for a few years after this for Park and Lord to move on to bigger things. And what were those things, you may ask? Well, tune in to the next episode when Aardman's partnership with DreamWorks begins.